Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. On Tuesday, nearly a dozen witnesses testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee during a hearing on police reform. The witness list included experts with backgrounds in civil rights and law enforcement. Senators on both sides of the aisle discussed the need to fix what they said was a broken system.
I've never been stopped. And when I see a cop behind me, the first thing I think about is, what did I do wrong, and can I talk myself out of this ticket? There's literally no fear. And I wouldn't like to live in a country where I'd be afraid to be stopped. So hopefully we can all understand that problem and fix it. But it is a problem. Every black man in America, virtually every black man in America, feels like if they get stopped by the cop, it's a traumatic experience.
The stakes right now are high. Will we meet this moment in history and actually do something real, or will we find ourselves back here again a year from now, 3 years from now, with mass protests in the streets by people of all different backgrounds demanding change? And so, Mr. Chairman, the truth is, I actually have faith in us as a country. I don't have faith we're going to get there on time, and justice delayed is justice denied.
Today, President Trump issued an executive order calling for accreditation standards for police departments, data sharing on police officers who use excessive force, and federal funding to help police respond to the homeless and mentally ill. Let me be clear, this is not enough. It does not meet this moment. This is not enough. There are thousands of people marching in the streets in 50 states demanding meaningful change. The people are demanding action. They are not marching in the streets for watered-down proposals that won't hold any officers accountable. And there is nothing about what the President announced today that would hold police officers who break the rules and break the law accountable.
George Floyd should be alive today, but he isn't. His life evaporated before our eyes, before the eyes of the world. Our nation has been left in pain. My state has been left in pain, grieving, marching, and demanding justice. This is not a time to just talk about it. If we are silent, we are complicit. If we stand there and demand dominance and wave Bibles, we're no better than monsters.
The hearing happened a short time after President Trump signed an executive order on police accountability at the White House. Part of the president's order establishes a national database documenting police misconduct. Senate Republicans are also set to unveil their proposed legislation to address police reform tomorrow. Their plan and the president's order do not address the issue of qualified immunity, which protects officers from being sued over actions they take while on duty. Michael Lawlor, he is an associate professor of criminal justice at the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences. That is at the University of New Haven. Thanks so much for being with us, Michael. What are your thoughts about what you heard during that hearing today?
Well, the most encouraging thing, Elaine, is that the things seem to be aligning, right? You see hearings in Congress, you see the president signing an executive order. Here in Connecticut and around the country, you see state legislatures and city councils convening to talk about this very issue. And in my experience, and I've been involved in this stuff for a long time, nothing like this has ever happened before. So my sense is, in the short term, the Congress and state legislatures will enact some reforms. But next year, I think after the elections are over, obviously depending on the outcome of the elections, I think you're going to see some very extraordinary, wide-ranging reforms enacted in the first time, at least in the last 50 years.
So Senate Republicans will unveil their proposal tomorrow, and it seems to be in sync with what the president's executive order covers. Absent, though, is qualified immunity, any discussion of that, and something that Senator Tim Scott said would be a poison pill. What's your take? Is it a mistake not to include that as part of this legislation?
Well, it's definitely a mistake. And it's definitely, most people don't understand the legal technicalities involved in qualified immunity. But basically all it does is guarantee that if you sue the police for excessive force, for example, you can't even get in front of a jury if a judge concludes that what the police officers did was, quote unquote, objectively reasonable under the circumstances. So elimination of qualified immunity doesn't mean police officers are automatically liable. It only means that you can bring your case to a jury. And I think that's something that we would expect in a regular automobile accident case. The fact that you can't do it in these types of cases, it has really become a problem, because for all intents and circumstances, the only real liability that an individual police officer might have is the possibility of being arrested or fired from his or her job. This would add a different dimension, and it would also add something very important, and that is the employers of police officers, usually towns or states, would themselves be on the hook, because typically the way it works is if you sue an individual police officer and you win, then it's the employer, the government, that has to pay. So it creates an extraordinary incentive to do the right kind of training, to pick the right kind of people to be in these jobs. And my sense is that incentive to do the right thing would have a big impact in a very short period of time.
What do you say, though, to the argument that some make that because of the nature of police work and the split-second nature of the decisions that need to be made when an officer may feel as though his or her life is in danger, that this is something that should be non-negotiable qualified immunity because of the unique nature of police work itself?
Well, I mean, this is a question that a jury should decide, right? I mean, if you can get all of the evidence in front of a jury and you can ask them, do they think what the police officer did was reasonable, all factors considered? You know, for sure, in a lot of these situations, police officers did the exact right thing, right? But in all too many cases, and we're seeing them now, that's clearly not the case. And don't forget, it's not the police officer individually who pays any money. It's the agency that hired him and trained him or her, right? And I think we want to have that incentive to make sure that police agencies that do not observe best practices in hiring and screening and education, training, and supervision and oversight, that they have an incentive to do it. You know, my hometown here, East Haven, Connecticut, where I grew up, and I represented the town in the state legislature here in Connecticut for 24 years, our police department had clearly gone off the rails. And under the Obama administration, the Department of Justice came in, investigated, through a consent decree, basically forced the department to reboot itself. And at the end of the day, they adopted the best practices. They got rid of the officers that were creating the problems. 4 of them ended up in federal prison. And today, there's less crime. There's much higher morale in the police department itself. And the community, and this is very important, the community trusts the police. That's called legitimacy. And I think that has to be the goal. And that was the centerpiece of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. And I think you're hearing repeated references to those recommendations in all of these discussions. And they've been on the shelf now for 5 years. They should come off the shelf, and they should become standard operating procedure in every police department in the country.
So speaking of the Obama administration, President Trump attacked the Obama administration on this issue, and I want to play some of what he had to say about that. Let's listen.
We will have reform without undermining our many great and extremely talented law enforcement officers. President Obama and Vice President Biden never even tried to fix this during their 8-year period. The reason they didn't try is because they had no idea how to do it. And it is a complex situation. Beyond the steps we are taking today, I am committed to working with Congress on additional measures.
So, Michael, the question is, the Obama administration, in actuality, the Justice Department under the Obama administration opened more than 24 so-called pattern or practice investigations into police departments across the country. The Trump administration has only opened 1. Critics have called for more. Do you think these kinds of investigations are actually helpful to bring about change? It sounds like, from the example you brought up there in your home state of Connecticut, the answer is yes.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, that's the proof of concept, as we would say in academia, right? It's a theory, you tested it, you put it into practice, and it worked. There's less crime, higher morale, and the community trusts the police. In East Haven's case, the police were targeting Latinos. We had a recent wave of Latino immigrants into the community of East Haven, and they were being singled out for motor vehicle stops and quite a bit of harassment, actually. And the changes took place. And now East Haven is a model police department. And if you Google East Haven Police Department, you will see the testimonials to the success of this one initiative. And it's been replicated elsewhere. Look at Camden, New Jersey, for example. That's been cited quite a bit recently. I mean, there are many examples of this, and you see changes happening right now on a local level. The San Francisco Police Department just announced that they're going to stop answering 911 calls with police officers unless there's a public safety issue. They'll send other first responders to deal with more routine problems. And you've heard some of these cited by the president in his executive order today. He talked about mental illness. He talked about substance abuse. He talked about homelessness. The criminal justice system is not equipped to address those problems in any effective way. There are first responders who have expertise in what to do and how to do it. And asking police officers to deal with all, I mean, don't forget, we ask police officers these days to do so many different things. They have to be experts in a whole variety of subject matters. And I think it's unfair to them. And politicians over the last several decades have dumped more and more problems into the laps of frontline police officers. And I think what you're hearing now is a discussion about let's take back some of those responsibilities and give them to people better equipped, better trained, more effectively supported to address those kinds of problems. And I think that's the direction we're heading in. In fact, I was just reading that in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where they've had a lot of problems with their local police department, they're already underway doing something very similar to what San Francisco is doing in terms of finding other people to respond. If you do a pie chart of calls into 911, you'll see that a very small fraction of those calls relate to anything close to threats of violence or immediate danger. Most of it, I mean, people have gotten accustomed to calling 911 when they have a problem managing their own children. I mean, this is not something that should be tying up our police professionals, but it is something that needs to be addressed. And I think, another thing that President Trump addressed today, and I've heard plenty of other people talking about it, putting federal money in the pipeline to facilitate training and staffing in the areas I was just describing. I think, every crisis is an opportunity. And out of this crisis, I think we will have much less crime going forward. We'll have much higher morale among police and much greater trust in our law enforcement agencies. That's what I hope for, and I think it's a very realistic expectation at this point.
Michael Lawlor. Michael, thanks very much for sharing your insight with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.